So let me introduce our speaker for this session, Daniel Say. Daniel, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And you?
I'm good too, thank you. Can you tell us where you are joining us from today?
I'm in Milan, Italy today.
Okay, great. Oh, I saw somebody saying Milan, Italy in the chat as well. Wow, that's nice. Okay, so let me tell you all a little bit about Daniel. Daniel Say has 5 years of experience working with young learners, teens, and adults across the full range of CEFR levels. He teaches general English, exam classes, and business English. An early career teacher, he is currently on the final leg of his journey through the Delta. He also works as an oral examiner and has spoken at conferences around Europe. Very impressive, Daniel. So please take it away. And remember, I'm here in the background if you need anything.
Thank you, Sujata, for introducing me. Can you all see my screen? Thank you.
Yes, Daniel.
So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, and welcome to this session. As the title of my webinar suggests, we're going to look at how English language teachers can bring intercultural awareness into the classroom. I'm going to start by briefly defining the term intercultural awareness, and then we'll explore 5 different types of classroom activities together. I'm also going to include a classroom mini project if we've got time towards the end. Now, I'm sure all of you here are no stranger to these simple activities, but we're going to look at how teachers can exploit them for the set purpose of this session. First, let us begin with your personal experience. I'd like to ask you a question and feel free to answer yes or no in the chat. Here it is. In the past 24 hours, did you have conversations with other people whose first language is different to yours? I see a lot of yeses in the chat. A couple of no's. And again, a lot of yeses. Thank you. So for those of you who answered yes, what you've done there can be regarded as a form of intercultural communication. In order to relate to your conversation partners and to achieve your communicative purpose, it is safe to say that you've either consciously or unconsciously tapped into your knowledge about cultures. This knowledge contains what you've picked up over the years growing up in your own culture or cultures with an S. It also comes from what you've read, heard, or experienced in real life. And to a certain extent, such cultural knowledge is reflected in your choice of language, conversational strategies, or even social etiquette. Therefore, intercultural awareness is linked to this kind of knowledge about different cultures. But what does it mean exactly? According to the social psychologist Geert Hofstede, intercultural awareness is about understanding the way in which each cultural community expresses meanings and values, which is done in similar or different ways. It is this kind of understanding which helps us to apply the appropriate value systems as we read into other cultures. Will Baker, who is professor in modern languages and linguistics at the University of Southampton, UK, takes it even further. He defines it as the ability to put our understanding into practice in real-time communication. This in turn enables us to make informed choices of the strategies we use to communicate across cultures successfully. Now, you may ask, why do language learners need intercultural awareness? Among various compelling reasons, I'm going to mention two today. First, we're living in an increasingly connected world, and intercultural awareness helps people to become more effective communicators, whether that's in their professional or everyday settings. Second, a greater understanding of other cultures will expose learners to ideas beyond the limitation of their own culture. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to agree with those ideas, but at the very least, they'll be aware of different ways of doing and seeing things. Not only does it open the learners' minds to new perspectives, but it'll also enable them to develop comprehensive thinking skills, which are indispensable to making sound decisions and solving problems. Indeed, there's already a strong case for bringing intercultural awareness into language classrooms. And as Professor Baker puts it, language learning is inevitably an intercultural process, whether or not this is explicitly recognized in teaching. But my question is, in terms of intercultural awareness, how can teachers identify the learning aims and objectives in various lesson activities? I'm aware there are different models for teachers to choose from, one of which was proposed by Michael Byram and co. and adopted by the Council of Europe. And there's also data from a classroom project conducted by Will Baker in Thailand, which was published by the British Council. But what I'd like to do in this session is share a framework that is based on reflection on my previous teaching experiences. My proposed model, I've divided intercultural awareness into four increasing levels: knowledge, understanding, demonstration, and communication. We're going to refer back to these levels as we explore each activity, so that by the end of this session, you have a clear idea of what they mean. But as a general rule, which level you're going to choose will depend on your student's age and the amount of knowledge that they currently have. Now that we've established a model of learning aims, let's have a look at the first activity. This is an A to Z of countries, or A to Z in American English. The activity is suitable for learners at elementary level and above. As you can see, there's a well mapped here. And in this activity, learners need to brainstorm a list of countries starting with every alphabetical letter. So with a global audience in this session, let's see how many countries we can come up with today. Before I ask you to send anything in the chat, feel free to think about your ideas first. And when you're ready, please type the names of countries in the chat. Right, so I can see countries starting with letter A. Yeah, Angola, Albania. I've got Portugal, Armenia, Brazil, Belgium, Bangladesh. I've got China, India, Austria, Canada, Denmark, Guatemala, Finland, Egypt, France, right. Thank you. As we're in a webinar today, it's only possible to do this activity in the plenary setting. But in a real lesson, learners can work in groups and be given more generous time limits. To make it even more engaging for them, you can set this activity as a team game. Personally, I like using this brainstorming activity as a lead-in or warm-up starter so that I can engage my students' interests at the beginning of a lesson. I'd also suggest going easy on your students because many of them will only know the names of certain countries by their first language. But you can, of course, provide the English version in the post-activity feedback. Now, let's take a step back and think about how humans make sense of the world. Starting with children at nursery age, most of them are only capable of noticing their immediate surroundings. Once children start primary school, they gradually look beyond themselves and interact with others from various towns, cities, or countries. And by the time they become teenagers and young adults, they should more or less be ready to explore the wider world. Although we know that countries don't fully equate to cultures, and it's the same the other way around, countries are nonetheless the first thing that comes to most people's minds as they start developing basic intercultural awareness. However imperfect this brainstorming activity may be, it can give the learners a glimpse of the wider world. So, coming back to the aim of this brainstorming activity, since learners can gain basic knowledge about the world, this corresponds to the same word, knowledge, in my model. Learning doesn't stop here, and I argue teachers can further extend learners' knowledge beyond this brainstorming activity. To this end, I'd like to suggest two ideas for the follow-on activity. The first one is grammar practice. Now, when we talk about our past traveling experiences, we often use the present perfect simple, don't we? So what about using a mingling activity like the classic find someone who for this purpose? In fact, I think this will be the perfect activity. No pun intended. So how can teachers raise intercultural awareness with a mingling activity? Rather than have learners merely give short answers like, yes, I have, or no, I haven't, teachers can ask them to tell their classmates some facts about the countries they've been to. However, not all learners can afford to travel far and wide, and so after a no answer, they can instead talk about the reasons why they'd like to visit certain countries one day. What is more, if you're teaching multilingual classes, this setting naturally gives students opportunities to exchange authentic information about their own countries. Not only does it facilitate intercultural awareness on the knowledge level, but this kind of authentic exchange also allows learners to build rapport among themselves. Now, I'd just like to say a quick word about the language model for the follow-on activity. You notice I've included phrases like this part of, usually, and most people in my language input. I can't stress enough how important this is when teachers are trying to raise intercultural awareness in the classroom, because the last thing we want is that learners make sweeping generalizations about cultures or would otherwise end up reinforcing cultural stereotypes. Let's move on to the next activity. This is my go-to type of activity when I'm teaching the modals of deduction or speaking sub-skill of speculating. In this practice activity, learners are given photos of people who they are unfamiliar with, and they have to make informed guesses about those people. I've used this activity with teenage and adult learners at intermediate level and above, And I can say it's worked brilliantly across the board. Now, I'm going to show you 4 photos. And I'd like to know what you make of these people here. First, can you guess their occupation? Feel free to share your ideas in the chat, and you can label your responses A, B, C, and D. We've got teacher, singer, headmaster or head teacher for person B. Person C may be a singer. Right, person A could be a researcher. Oh, person D, maybe a politician. Right, an engineer for person B. Person C may be a writer. Right, thank you. Now, what about the nationality or nationalities? That's a trickier question, isn't it? Right, so a lot of you say person A could be Indian. What about the other people? What do you think? Person D could be from England. Yeah, person C may be Korean. Oh, person B could be Ghan. Is it Ghana or Ghanaian? Sorry, I can't pronounce that word properly. Yeah, from Ghana. Right, thank you. And finally, why are they famous or why were they famous? Again, feel free to share your ideas in the chat. Award winner. Oh, that's interesting. They were all stuck in a plane. Peace advocates, influencers, or presenters. Right. So thank you for your raw and enthusiastic responses. Now, shall we have a look together? So let's start with person A. She's an astronaut, actually, and she was born in India, and she's American. And person B is a poet from Canada. Person C is an actor from Scotland. I think Melissa may know this person. Finally, person D is a politician. So some of you make the right guess. He's from Zambia. You got any surprises? Right. So, what's the message behind this activity? Don't judge a book by its cover. I think it's only natural for us to make assumptions of other people based on empirical information. But it's equally important for us to constantly challenge our preconceptions with evidence. So we're encouraging learners to do exactly that in this practice activity. Now, I understand there are differences across cultures regarding how a person's identity is perceived. But my point is, in 2024, it's no longer relevant that we define a person by their face, ethnic origin, place of birth, or ancestry. Well, it would be unrealistic to tell the learners not to make assumptions of other people, as we all do. They should avoid jumping to conclusions when they initially interact with others from a different culture. Therefore, it would benefit the learners to develop this kind of understanding as part of their intercultural awareness. And that's why the aim of this activity corresponds to the word understanding in my motto. Let me share another activity for language practice. This one is about making comparisons. Now, some of you may ask, what's the link between practicing the comparative structures and raising intercultural awareness? Before we answer this question, can you let us know what kinds of classes you usually teach? Do you teach monolingual or monocultural classes? Please type yes or no in the chat. Some yeses, some nos. We've got both. Yeah, so some of you teach both types of classes. Thank you. Now, we often hear this cliche of learning about a new culture by interacting with people from that cultural community, don't we? But how is this possible in monolingual classes where the makeup of learners is almost always homogeneous? Now, let me just tell you a bit about myself. I moved out of the UK to Italy 11 years ago, and I often hear people talk about the differences between the north and the south of Italy. So, drawing on my life experiences, I came up with this practice activity, which I've used in monolingual classes with teenage and adult learners at intermediate level and above. In this activity, I ask each group of students to choose two distinct regions of a specific country for comparison. And they have to look up information about any similarities and differences between those regions. In terms of the materials for this activity, students can use authoritative country guides, good quality blog articles, and videos by ordinary people living in a target country. After that, each group of students report back to the whole class using the appropriate comparative structures to talk about the similarities and differences they've found. And those who are listening to their classmates have to say one thing they've learned about a target country afterwards. Given the limitations of monolingual classes, I say this is a practical way for the learners to gain a better understanding of different cultures, especially for those who may not usually look beyond their local community. However, at the risk of contradicting myself, one can argue that if this activity is used inappropriately, it can cause the learners to regurgitate some entrenched differences or entrenched ideas about regional differences. And so that would defeat the intended learning aim. That is, to promote better understanding of various cultures within and across countries. So I'll suggest that teachers use this activity judiciously. For example, if they already know such countries inside out, or after they've done extensive research on the regional differences of the target countries. Like the previous activity, we're using language practice as a tool for increasing learners' understanding of various cultures. And so this corresponds to the same word, understanding, in my model of learning aims. Now, we've explored ideas for language practice thus far, and let's move on to skills practice. Those of you who are preparing learners for some of the internationally recognized English exams will know that in the speaking exam, candidates are assessed on their interactive communication. In order to demonstrate good interactive communication, candidates need to be able to show adequate turn-taking skills. Just to make sure we're on the same page, the linguist Scott Thornbury defines a turn as the basic unit of a person's talk. And so turn taking is about how we manage such basic units of our talk in a conversation. For instance, how we start our turn, when we should finish it, or when we can politely interrupt the other person. Broadly speaking, I'm afraid there's no yardstick for measuring turn-taking skills against the word adequate. Or in fact, what kind of turn-taking is considered socially acceptable by any cultural community? We all know variations exist across cultures, don't we? Just to give you an example, in most English-speaking cultures, it's generally considered impolite to interrupt a person in the middle of their turn. Having said that, turn taking isn't only defined along the lines of macro cultures. Variations also exist within a single culture, depending on the kind of relationship between the speakers and the communicative setting where spoken interaction takes place. So coming back to the context of exam preparation classes, how can teachers raise learners' awareness of the appropriate turn-taking skills for speaking exams? Let's have a look at the discussion task together. As you can see, there's a question in the center of the spider diagram, and learners are given 5 suggested ideas as prompts for the discussion. Personally, I prefer to let my students have a go at this task first, and then they listen to 2 model candidates doing the same discussion task. They start with a gist task in order to familiarize themselves with the overall idea of the discussion. After that, learners listen for the second time with a different aim. This time, they notice how the model candidates take turns in discussing their opinions. And at the same time, learners can also compare their own performance to that of the model candidates. Teachers can facilitate this comparison by giving the learners a set of guiding questions about turn-taking interaction, such as these ones here. By the end of this listening task, learners should be able to identify what needs improving in their current turn-taking skills. In other words, they should understand what they can do in order to achieve good interactive communication. And so they can demonstrate what they've learned by doing further speaking practice. Similar to turn-taking skills in speaking, teachers can also raise intercultural awareness through teaching writing skills. Now, when it comes to writing skills, what kinds of difficulties do your students often have? Feel free to share your ideas and write a few words in the chat. spelling, yeah, first language interference. Yeah, so maybe they're thinking about a type of sentence structure in their first language. Mhm. Yeah, motivation, that's a good one as well. Yes, imagine if you need to ask students to write a long essay, they may not feel motivated in the classroom. Yeah, word order, lack of language, lack of vocabulary. Right. Thank you for your all your ideas. No, it is said that one of the reasons why learners struggle with writing is their lack of knowledge of genre in the target language. Without sufficient knowledge of genre, learners may not know exactly how they should organize and present their ideas when they're writing different types of texts. No, you may ask, what's the word genre got to do with intercultural awareness? To make a link between the two, we'll first need to define the term genre. The linguist J.R. Martin defines it as a staged, purposeful activity in which speakers and writers engage as members of their culture, whereas John Swales defines it as a class of communicative events, and the members of such events share communicative purposes recognized by those in the same community. In simpler words, an English essay should read like an essay to a speaker of English, not a letter or review. No, no matter which definition you accept, they all point towards genre as a cultural phenomenon. As I mentioned earlier, Hofstadter suggests that various cultures express meanings and values similarly or differently. So, if writing is a form of expression, learners cannot simply transfer the convention in their first language to English. Instead, they'll need to learn about the convention used by proficient writers in English. And that essentially means learning about genre. As we've seen in the previous activity, teachers can raise learners' awareness by giving them a model first to develop their understanding, and then learners demonstrate what they've learned by doing a task. For writing skills, teachers can use a genre approach. Let's say your students are going to write an essay in which they need to agree or disagree with the essay title. There's a type of discursive essays. First, you can give your students a sample essay and set them a just reading task so that they can gain an overall idea of the sample text. Then, students do another reading task with questions aimed at raising their awareness of the generic convention in the text. For example, to make students aware of how to structure a discursive essay, teachers can use a matching task for them to notice the main idea of each paragraph. To go further, learners can also analyze the function of each sentence within a paragraph, such as the topic sentence, which is a statement of the writer's opinion. In doing so, learners can gain insights into the organizational pattern of the writer's ideas. After that, learners demonstrate what they've learned by planning and drafting a discursive essay, and they should be able to apply the same set of generic convention to any other future essay in the same genre, irrespective of the essay title. Now, at the start of this webinar, I mentioned I will share ideas of a classroom mini project. After all, in order to raise intercultural awareness among the learners, What's better than asking them to research and compare cultures different to their own? For a start, learners can discover the basic facts of a target cultural community of their choice, such as its languages, important holidays, and staple food, among other things. To target the next level of intercultural awareness, learners can compare their own culture to the target cultural community, identifying the similarities and differences in customs and social norms. And for the more advanced, more capable learners, they can also explore the historical and cultural references embedded in certain language expressions. And finally, intercultural awareness doesn't come without looking into how a target's culture is seen in the eyes of other communities. Depending on how much information is available out there, learners can use travel guides, opinion columns, or survey reports from reputable sources. They can also watch well-researched videos by those who have interacted extensively with the target community. Whichever type of lesson material you choose for your students, the key is that they shouldn't rely on a single source of information as the expert or authority. Now that we've established what the learners do in the mini project, let's consider how teachers can plan a whole lesson or series of lessons based on it. To this end, I'm going to share 5 main lesson stages for the mini project. No, they're not in the right order, so I'll let you have a read first. There are 5 lesson stages from A to E. As you know, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to teaching, and so these lesson stages can be arranged in different orders. Let's think about this question now. How would you do it if you were teaching this lesson? Feel free to put the stages in any order you like and share your ideas in the chat. Right. We've got 2 different ideas or types of ideas in the chat. So some of you prefer to start with stage number D or letter D, and others prefer to start with stage B. Right, thank you. Now, let me share what I did in one of my lessons with some 20 level B1/B2 teenage learners. First, I asked my students to choose a target cultural community. Working in groups, they make decisions about the aspects of the target community they'd like to focus on. Then, students set a question for their mini project in order to find out the information they need. As students were looking up information on the internet, I gave them various pointers and language support along the way. After that, groups of students practiced giving their presentations, and I listened to them and gave them feedback. And finally, each group presented on what they've learned about their chosen target community to the whole class. And for those who were listening to their classmates, I gave them an evaluation form like this one here. In my evaluation form, I included statements that relate to the specific areas of intercultural awareness I was assessing on that day. And after the presentations, students gave peer-to-peer feedback based on this evaluation form. And to reinforce their learning, I mixed students from different groups so that they could discuss what they'd learned from their classmates' presentations. As we've seen, English language teachers can integrate intercultural awareness into various types of lesson activities, including language practice, skills practice, exam preparation tasks, and classroom mini projects. In fact, I'd argue this is better done implicitly in our teaching. So rather than explicitly teach intercultural awareness, teachers can develop learners' knowledge and understanding, which underlie their ability to put intercultural awareness into practice. And it goes without saying that people can hardly achieve successful cross-cultural communication without having a sufficient level of intercultural awareness. To come back to the idea that language learning is in itself an intercultural process, when learners are learning English, not only are they learning an international language, but they're also developing their ability to connect with various cultures around the world. So I hope I've been able to give you some useful practical ideas if you're looking to bring intercultural awareness into your own classroom. Before we come to the question and answer, please let us know in the chat which classroom idea from this webinar you'd like to try out. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was such an interesting session and also something so relevant in our global context today. I couldn't agree more with the kinds of activities that you have, the range of activities that you have shared today, to specifically to integrate the diverse cultures that we see in our classrooms today. The point that you made, I think, somewhere where you said that this is 2024, can't agree more. This should be the norm. It seems so intuitive that it should be, right? Okay, so I have some questions coming up. And yes, my favorite activity was activity number 2, the modals of deduction. That was really so interesting and made the point so beautifully, and also connected so well to what you were telling us in the end about implicit teaching of intercultural awareness is the way to go. And all the examples and activities that you showed were, a perfect example. And I hope it set the ground for many in our audience to perhaps try and practice this in their classrooms. Okay. So about questions, well, I have one here which is from our audience, our Facebook audience, where they're asking about writing. So they say that some students can write properly without any grammatical mistakes, but they can't speak well. So what should you do for this? I mean, I think it is in terms of the genre writing that you were talking about in relation to that. And probably at lower levels.
Yes, I think if we're looking at genre, there are some spoken genres as well. And I think in order to give students some kind of framework or structure to work with, we can do the same with speaking, so they can listen to a model. And then, for example, let's take narration. So let's take narration as an example, and we can ask the students to listen to a model, and they identify the different stages of the narrative talk. So perhaps it can start with, well, the introduction, the background, and then there might be a kind of problem, and then after that, there's the resolution, and the speaker may talk about his or her opinion.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, so once students have this structure to work with, it should become easier for them to start speaking.
Okay, right. Another question is about, I think this is related to, I think the third activity, which was about researching and reporting. So a question from the audience is, how did your, for this activity, how did your students research the culture they were presenting? As in, which resources did you recommend or do you recommend if you're doing this in the classroom?
Right. So if I'm allowed to say this, I've used BBC Country Guides. I think this is one type of resource that um, learners could work with. Um, I think there are a lot of good quality travel blogs out there. So you see a lot of people, actually living in the country, and they talk about their experiences. So this is another type of resource that learners can use.
Mm, okay. I think uh, this is a question as well as a comment from one of our audiences, uh, where they basically asking if the class, if the classroom has, say, two cultures. Uh, so how would you encourage the teacher to teach, or is this question valid, as in which culture should the teacher focus on more of in order to support English language learning? Is there, uh, is this relevant at all in language teaching?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I can give you the best answer today, but I think in my experience, I've taught classes with two or three cultures, and I think one of the ways of dealing with that is to treat every student equally. So we're not trying to focus heavily on one or the other culture, but instead, I think if we can think about, I'm not sure if the word neutral is the best one here, but if we can think about this kind of neutrality, so we're treating every culture, every student in the classroom equally, and equally importantly, if I can say that. Um, and I think, yeah, it might be the answer I can give now, but feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll have to think about it first to give you a more detailed response.
No, I have to agree with what you're saying, that you can't say one culture is more superior than the other, given, especially, I think, when you asked that first question, how many of you teach monocultural? I think I saw more no's than yeses, which just shows us how multilingual and multicultural our classrooms are today, no matter where we are in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Uh, okay, there's a question that I have, which is so, um, how can teachers encourage the students to explore their own language and culture? Uh, and does that have an influence in the way they can communicate in English? I mean, the students' own culture, can the teacher do some activities there, you think?
That's a really good question. It's a broad question as well. Um, I think there are often stories about cultures, and I think teachers can encourage students to look into those stories. So that's one type of resource in the classroom. And I think it may even work better if we're thinking about the students' own culture or cultures and English, and they can make comparisons between two different cultures. Because I think in doing that, students can discover more about their own culture as well as the target culture that they're looking into.
Mm. Okay, one more question, which is more about like from your since you presented on intercultural awareness today, do you have any experience of using this in your own classroom, where you saw that by incorporating intercultural awareness, you saw that your students were able to communicate more effectively in the target language, which is English that you're teaching? Have you had those experiences? Can you share?
Yes, I have. Um, the first one that comes to my mind is an exam preparation class at level B2. So we were working on turn taking skills in that lesson. I was teaching 3 students and they were 16 years old. I think one was 17. And so we started with a discussion task and then we talk about the way that different participants in a conversation mention an idea and then we pass it to the next person. So in a way, we don't dominate the whole discussion, but there's equal participation in that discussion. I can also tell you a little bit about the second activity. So the one about guessing the occupation, nationality
Yes.
of those people. And I've used it with some adult learners as well. And actually, it was an eye-opening experience for them. Yeah. And it
Okay.
changed their way of perceiving others as well. Because I think sometimes we're aware of different ways of perceiving people, but we're not conscious of our assumptions or our preconceptions. And I think, yeah, this activity worked really well in that lesson with the adult learners.
Yeah, it's like raising awareness of our own, biases, personal biases, in which we are not even aware of. Uh, really right. I mean, that was really a very thought-provoking exercise, I must say. Yeah, great ideas. I'll look for some more questions coming. Okay, there's one question from Mohammed Salah who's asking, are there any barriers to adopting an intercultural class?
Now, in my teaching context, I haven't encountered any barrier, but I think it depends on your own context. On your own context, and also I think maybe in certain educational settings, it's not always possible to implement this kind of approach in your classroom. But what I would say is the way I approach this topic is to think about the possible types of lesson activities I can use. And as you can see, we've looked at brainstorming, we've looked at making guesses, deduction, and these are all common types of language practice activities we can use. And even if you're working on language skills, then I think it's possible that you can try to integrate some kind of intercultural awareness activities into your lessons.
Um, Thank you for that. I think because um, many teachers, when they are preparing their lessons, for example, what should they be aware of? What are some of the possible challenges, before we introduce something like that. I think it's from that respect that the audience had this question.
Yeah, it also depends on the students as well. It depends on their attitudes towards other cultures. And I think one of the good ways of doing that is to start small. So if you remember, there are 4 levels of intercultural awareness. I don't think teachers have to target the top one in every single lesson. I think if we can start small and think about just the basic level, and we can kind of notch it up bit by bit over time, then that will work.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I think we will have to end our session there, which is really sad because we could go on. This is such an interesting and really interesting and, like I said, a very relevant topic. So thank you so much, Daniel. And we hope to see you on again in another platform, another British Council platform possibly. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We have another lineup of very interesting sessions in the afternoon that begins at 3 p.m. UK time. So thank you all and hope to see most of you there again. Thank you very much.